finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of BS Free MD, and we're so excited to be doing video for you all now. If you're watching on Rumble, and I think we'll put this one on YouTube as well. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we are over the top about our two guests today who were featured on our episode 81, The Real Anthony Fauci. And I'll let you introduce them, Tim.
So we have Tony Lyons, who is the publisher of Skyhorse Publishing, and willing to publish things on, off the map. We'll give you a little picture of some of the books that they've had published here. Here we go. Real Anthony Fauci, which is what we discussed before. Can you believe nobody but Skyhorse would publish Woody Allen's book? I find that hard to believe, but it's true. Paul Manafort, on and on and on. So just really courageous, a courageous company and a great guy to have a conversation with. And then we have Sofia Karstens, who's worked a lot with Children's Health Defense, which is RFK Jr.'s organization to try to defend children from the healthcare industry, vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. And she was essentially the editor of The Real Anthony Fauci. And wow, lots of insights. If you've read the book, May and I have both read it. It is amazing. It is so unbelievably well researched, super in depth. I was at where I water ski, hanging out with my buddies yesterday. One of my friends had read it 3 times, and he said, if half of what's in the book is true, then we're in deep trouble. Well, I think a lot more than half is true. So welcome, Tony, and welcome, Sofia, back to BS Free MD. We are so excited to have you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Awesome. So my understanding is, it's been a few weeks since we talked to you, but that the censorship of the book has, as they would say in Spinal Tap, been turned up to 11. Would both of you take turns and elaborate exactly on what's going on with the censorship of the book?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, this book has been censored in every conceivable way, so I don't even know where to start. But, one of the most recent ways is that they took all the positive reviews on Amazon and they're kind of ranked by how many likes they have. So there was a number 1 review that was written by Dr. Mercola that had something like 7,500 likes on it. Now that's disappeared. And now the positive review with the most likes is 59. And the negative with the most likes has 2,500. And this is for a book that has something like 99% 4 or 5-star reviews. So somehow this tiny portion of negative reviews have gotten all the likes. So of course that didn't happen. We know it didn't happen. I have screenshots of thousands of likes on positive reviews. So they've gamed the system in every way that they could to try to make people less likely to buy this book. So you can't place ads in the New York Times. You can't place them on any big tech platform. You can't place them on Amazon. Any of their ad programs, it's taken off. They have a designation for it where they put an icon at the top, sort of pointing you to the CDC website where you can get real information about COVID-19. And they, let's see. So all of the bestseller lists were skewed against the book. So in the first week that it came out, it sold more copies than any hardcover nonfiction book in the United States by more than 20,000 copies. And yet it was listed in the New York Times as number 5. It was just off 2 or 3 other of the bestseller lists. It was not on the Publishers Weekly bestseller list. It was not on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And when I sort of chased all those people down, the Wall Street Journal said that that the sales were reported as bulk sales. So the sort of scam there is they have a definition for bulk sales. So I got them on a 2-hour Zoom call, and we talked through all the details of how I thought the censorship was working. And they confessed to me that if most of the sales go through Amazon, that is considered a bulk sale because it's one customer. So if a book gets censored in all of the small bookstores around the country, and we called many of them, and they actually told people that they wouldn't sell them copies. So the book was available virtually in only one place. So they called that a bulk sale and then kept it off bestseller list for that reason. So many games were done with this book. So in the search, the search algorithm on Amazon, you have to type in the actual title or some version of Bobby Kennedy's name. It's never recommended to you. So any other best-selling book is recommended to you with all kinds of other books where it says, if you like this, then you'll probably like that. So all these different mechanisms. And what's really fascinating is this document that was put out by the US Surgeon General, where they talk about doing all of exactly those kinds of things. So they talk about going to all the big tech platforms and asking them to do things like de-emphasize books. So they don't explain what that is, but they say that they're going to deal with things like stickiness, which is sort of like how easy it is to find something, or how a book gets traction, how it gets hooked in with the algorithms for all kinds of other books. So the US Surgeon General got involved in the censorship of information, books, doctors, scientists, and they had an actual 22-page playbook saying exactly how they were going to do it. So even though it's clearly unconstitutional for the US government to go to all these private companies and all these nonprofits and try to get them to do things to make it less likely that you would receive information, even really credible information. And they do it by designating it as misinformation, and they define misinformation is anything that contradicts a public health official. So they decide what the truth is, then everything else is automatically misinformation. And then they can narrow it even further because they achieve this manufactured consensus by getting rid of everything else. So they can then say, well, if you do a search, you find 20 million people think it's great to get the mRNA vaccine, and only 1,000 people think it isn't, because any doctor, any scientist who disagreed with Dr. Fauci, any book that disagreed, was censored in every way you can do that, and deplatformed, and interviews were taken down, references to the book, anything good about it, likes, like I said before. So that's the general story. But then, it's that words like misinformation or conspiracy theory sort of become weaponized so that you can just totally discard anything that contradicts a really specific narrative that somebody's making. And in this case, the puppet master was kind of Dr. Fauci for a very long period of time.
Well, shouldn't Fauci be censored then for disinformation because he's disagreed with himself?
Right. No, that's
he's contradicted. As I've often said, he's had more positions on coronavirus than the Kama Sutra.
Sure.
So what would his position be though? Like crouching elf, I guess, something like that, right? But it's. Go ahead.
Yeah, his point of view there is that he represents science at any given point. So he's the only one who is entitled legally in this country to disagree with him. So he can disagree with himself, because when he has a point of view, that is medical consensus in America. So if you say anything that counters that, you're totally deplatformed using this really specific set of systems. And then if he changes his mind, then that's fine. That's the new consensus.
But, you think of the last 2 weeks, okay? So Fauci was all over ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine because they wanted certain kinds of randomized controlled trials. You can't do it. You can't wipe your rear without a randomized controlled trial, according to Fauci. So that was the narrative for, over 2 years. And then last week he comes out and says, we don't have time for randomized controlled trials for the bivalent vaccine. We just need to release it. So completely insane, totally unsafe, not science, not FDA approved, not nothing. I just changed my mind and we'll just do this on a whim. And then last night, Sunday night, whatever that is, October or September 17th or whatever it is, 18th, Biden comes out and says the pandemic's over. Okay, well, if the pandemic's over, then the emergency's over. Then you don't need an EUA for a freaking cold, because that's what Omicron is. So this entire narrative is absolutely crumbled. This is like a deck of this is a house of cards in a freaking hurricane. It doesn't. I mean, I don't know how you can go along with this anymore. It just doesn't make any sense. Sophia, do you have any comments to my ranting?
I feel like, when you see a cockroach in your house and then it's like you kind of see another one, and then a few months later you see another one, and then finally you call the exterminator and they open the basement door and the entire basement's full of whatever, termites, cockroaches, whatever. I kind of feel like that's how this has gone. It's like we've now opened the basement door to a massive amount of, let's call it, problems and issues that exist just below the surface. And I think, what Tony was saying as far as the mechanisms for the censorship and everything, they do everything from, like he was explaining, futz around with the kind of numbers a little bit or a lot, and they don't allow certain things to get out, or they only allow certain other things to get out. Bookstores that were carrying it officially would, when we would call pretending to be, customers, would tell us that they were out. And then I knew that we weren't out. I knew that. And I also knew that we had told every place that if they were to run out, that we could get them within 24 hours, a certain number of copies. And they told us, oh, well, the publisher told us, that we weren't going to be able to get books for at least until the end of January. This is in November. And I didn't say, well, we're the publisher, but so I knew that was not true. And then everything from, or finally, we sometimes had, distributors who told us flat out, yeah, no, we're not selling it. We're not selling that book. So wait, you're telling me you have copies, but you're not selling them? That's correct. So you have it, you won't sell us a copy. Yeah, we're not selling it. Okay. And people who were, when you would order online, you would get an email the next morning saying, oh, sorry, we're going to refund your money for this order. We're unable to send you this book at this time. So everything from that to when you go on Amazon, which largely did carry it, as Tony mentioned, they had orchestrated a way for that to be one purchase, one buyer, so that it basically didn't count for the numbers. But when you could go on, this little thing pops up that basically says, are you sure you want to do this? It's like this CDC for real information. It's like as if do you really want to buy this book right now? Are you sure this is something you really want to do? Would kind of pop up. So all of these things, the mechanism was astonishing. And every time something new would happen, Tony and I would call each other and go, are you kidding me? Really? Is this really happening right now? Okay, try calling. See what it really is. When you hear it, you kind of go, that doesn't really happen in real life. And then it did. And then they took it 10 steps further. So all that stuff was going on. But I think the really alarming, and it's funny kind of when you're up against it, because what else can you do but laugh? But the when you start to look at what's behind it, that's when it really becomes alarming, because what you do have here is a government who said flat out that they were working with tech platforms to censor information. And there's two sort of important capillaries with this. The first is, this is not censorship of, explicit lyrics in a rap song. You're talking about censoring critical information about health that individuals need to be able to make an informed consent decision, and that was taken away from them. So that's one path. The other path that's important to investigate really much further is how much the government was involved in, a bookstore or Amazon or the New York Times or whatever it is. But how much are we looking at a government that was orchestrating and executing this fascist coup? Because that's what this is. You're telling us that we can only, as Tony pointed out, we can only repeat the narrative that's being fed, and if we repeat something other than the narrative that's being fed, which is, by the way, decided by a government agency, then we're dissenters and we're dangerous, and it's a closed loop. So when, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was another statement or whatever put out by the government, saying that when you disagree, and I'm going to get the exact quote wrong, but basically when you disagree with the majority, you are extremist, and that's dangerous. So, and the word majority and extremist were part of that quote. Again, I probably put it together wrong, but our president said, if you disagree with the minority, with the majority, you are extremist. And it should be noted and revisited what happened during the Cold War and how individuals were forced into psychological institutions and everything else, using that quote. And I think we're at this incredibly dangerous, psychologically dangerous crossroads. The interesting thing, however, is in only the last few days, I'm seeing a shift in people who really were, we'll just not even talk about the fact that a week ago or a month ago or a year ago, you were ready to call in your neighbor. But now, I was at a facility the other day, and a person that I know, and a year ago, she was so far on the bandwagon. And she said, I'm not getting a booster. It doesn't work. I don't think it works. I was like, you don't say. And then she proceeds to tell me how she thinks, now looking at it, it doesn't prevent transmission and it doesn't prevent infection. So she's unclear as to why they're pushing this. And I'm like, wow, you came to that all by yourself? Yeah, no one's been saying that to you for 2 years. And then she told me that her daughter had contracted COVID after the jab and had one of the side effects that we see frequently, post-jab infection, caused a particular side effect that seems to not happen with individuals who are unvaccinated who contract COVID. And then she proceeds to tell me that a lot of people that she knows feel like they may have had a side effect from the jab. All of it, as if this is like news to me, right? And it's painful. It's beautiful and painful to sit there and listen to people try to explain to you how they think this might not be exactly what they were told it was, but at the same time, she's like the 12th person in 2 weeks who seems to have the scales fallen from her eyes. So,
Well,
I mean, this is alarming, way more alarming in terms of the proverbial they, what they are doing, but interestingly encouraging in terms of how people seem to actually be seeing it finally. And weirdly, the people that I was like, these people are hopeless. They're never going to get it. And now they're trying to explain to me how, you know, they've just discovered, you know, some smoking gun that. So I don't know. It's 6 of 1. But what's interesting to me is that weird dichotomy. It's like they are doubling down for sure. Like the pandemic's over, but we're still in an emergency. Like, okay, well, both things can't be true. You can't have it both ways. And yet that seems to be a mechanism for people going, hang on a second, logic, guys.
right.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think they painted themselves into a politically untenable corner because they said, you know, Fauci comes out and says we don't need to have a randomized controlled trial. We'll just release the bivalent vaccine. Yet the pandemic's over because, you know, it's over. And I talked about this in January. I knew it was going to be over in summer or the end of summer because of the midterms. It's just political theater. And so, but yet if they come out and say, oh yeah, whoopsie, we don't really need the vaccines anymore, then they get the wrath of God, basically, where people going, well, I lost my business, I lost my job, you gave my kid myocarditis, like what the hell's going on? So I mean,
they're in an interesting catch-22 right now.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be pretzel yoga trying to, you know, make this into something that anyone buys, and I just don't see it happening. Tony, tell us about this document. Where did you get it? When was it produced? You know, is it the smoking gun as far as, you know, it's fascism. It's exactly what Sofia said. It's the government coercing massive companies, picking winners and losers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it came out almost at the exact time that Bobby Kennedy's book came out, which is, you know, sort of fascinating timing. But, you know, and then if you look at all the things that happened to the real Anthony Fauci, where there are no reviews in major newspapers, you know, you can't buy the book in bookstores, you can't find it in libraries, you can't advertise for it. So, you know, everything is conspiring together to make it fail. And then the book still sells more than 1 million copies. So there are two possibilities there. One is that censorship just doesn't work, and that the American people require a better argument and aren't willing just to be sort of told what to do, what to think, what to buy, what to read. Or there's another possibility, and that is that the censorship worked like crazy and that people were totally brainwashed, and that 10 or 20 million people might have read Bobby Kennedy's book and been convinced by it. Because, you know, like I said, nobody reviewed it. Nobody countered anything. I mean, if Dr. Fauci believed that he could go on to national television and prove to the 1 million people who read this book and the millions of other people who were talking about the kinds of things that were in the book, he would have done that. So the fact that he had to use censorship, the fact that he had to exercise his power, that's always a sign of weakness. Because if you can convince people, anybody knows that's a much more powerful tool. That's why, you know, at least in theory, democracies maybe last longer, because there's this, you know, sense of consent, even if it's an illusion of consent. People then are willing to get on board with it. So you get one America versus 2 Americas or 10 Americas where you don't have any real consensus. So, you know, that's what I think was going on there, that Dr. Fauci knew that he couldn't argue his way out of it. He couldn't debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or any of the other people who he was involved in censoring. So it became about total control. And he used all these mechanisms, and it doesn't seem likely that it's an accident that they were utilized at the same time when Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book came out. So I think that it's unclear whether, you know, there certainly, before the book came out, at that period, there were millions of people who disagreed with Dr. Fauci, but there weren't 150 million people or 180 million people. So now we have a situation where people believe, generally there's a big percentage of the people in this country believe that there's incredible medical corruption. Now, it seems obvious to all of us here, but the idea that the government and Dr. Fauci could be working for pharmaceutical companies at the expense of the public, where Dr. Fauci wasn't weighing or thinking through whether a vaccine is better than ivermectin or something else. He was just trying to follow the thing that would lead to the biggest profits for his partners. So, if that's true, then we're living in just a totally corrupt country. And getting rid of Dr. Fauci isn't going to be good enough. I mean, Dr. Fauci has a sort of a playbook here too. And his exit playbook is to leave quietly and then presumably claim the fifth, so that the congressional hearings are then very short. He's just saying no comment to everything.
I think that's a really interesting point. And the fact is, what's interesting about characters like Tony Fauci and others, it seems that it's like the mob, they're weirdly smug. They think that they're, not expendable until they are. And what's interesting is I think Bobby's book made Tony Fauci expendable. And I think that's where the pivot is happening. I think, the backpedaling that you're seeing and the duck and cover that you're seeing and the sort of, I don't know anything that's ever happened in my life ever that you're seeing, every time he kind of speaks now, is indicative of it. The light bulb has come on, and he's realized that now he's expendable. And this book, Bobby's an attorney, and he's a really good one, and he's a corporate attorney. So the idea that this has been laid out in such a way as to provide a blueprint for some sort of indictment, not just of Tony Fauci, but of individuals, I think that's where the rats are leaving the ship. We're going to get rid of the expendables first, and then we're going to circle the wagons and try to whatever's next. But the reality is, I think, and this is where the point that you were just making, Tony, I think is huge. It's the individuals really don't matter. I know everybody wants to see Tony Fauci strung up, and so do we. He's a terrible guy. But the reality is that these individuals, getting rid of them is cutting off the head of the Hydra, because 3 more are going to take its place, because it is the system that is corrupt. And so when you have a corrupt system, there's always going to be a morally elastic, corrupt individual who's willing to come in and exploit the corrupt system to their advantage. So the answer isn't to end with putting someone in jail. The answer is to dismantle that system and rebuild and restructure and recreate a system that is actually designed to support and protect the people in whatever country you are. Not an illusion of protection or advocacy, but an actual protection and advocacy of the population.
You might have just answered sort of my question, Sophia, but I was thinking when Tony was talking about how, with Anthony Fauci, you hear him on TV and he would try to explain why something is the way it is. And the answer was never really backed in any data. It was just like, well, studies show, but there's no study to back it up. It's just because I say, and this is how it is. Just believe me, because, it's absolutely evident in the book for anybody that has read it. And if you haven't, read it now, because there's so much data to quote it in there. Like the bibliography section is massive, and he's backed up. RFK's backed up, everything he said with data, scientific evidence. But when Tony Fauci comes on and talks, and contradicts himself as well, it's never backed by anything. And so as a scientist myself or doctor, I'm like, well, you say this, but where's the evidence for whatever? There is none. And then, so I guess my point was going to be, maybe for people who haven't read the book, how does Tony Fauci control the narrative to get the book silenced and off? Like, how much power, or how does he have that power to work with government or powerful agencies or the heads of Amazon or publishing companies so that they don't sell this? I mean, I understand what's going on, but maybe some of our listeners don't. Like, well, so how does Tony Fauci squash the sale of this book? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to go back to one thing, I just like to read one quote that I have, which is from Dr. Richard Horton, who is, for many years, he was the head of the Lancet. And he says, perhaps one half of scientific literature may simply be untrue. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. So this is somebody running the most highly respected medical journal in the country. He has nothing to gain from saying that. So it's clearly his conscience speaking. So what you have is, I was talking to a guy from the New York Times, just trying to sort of make some inroads into the way people are thinking there and why they're doing some of the things that they're doing. And so to set up for that conversation, I told him that I wouldn't meet him unless he read The Real Anthony Fauci first. So he agreed to read it, and he promised me that he had read it. And I asked him what he thought, and he made a really big point that he was looking through the citations. So there are 2,194 citations. So he was able to find one that had been retracted. And then I looked into that, and there's a big controversy over why that study was retracted. And it's a long, complicated story. But what you see is that the medical journals, even according to somebody from the Lancet, are publishing things that are only accurate half the time, that most of the time, or the other half at the least, they're directed by what big corporations want. So they're directed by what benefits and what leads to more profit for big pharmaceutical companies. So if you write something and it's peer reviewed and you get it published, but it has a big impact on sales of a pharmaceutical product, God help you, because what's going to happen is the wrath
is what's going to happen to you.
So the wrath of those companies will come down on you, and they will do everything they can to get that study retracted, which, Monsanto did that in a very big case. If you look at the Vioxx trials, they show things like there were lots of scientists saying that Vioxx was leading to heart attacks and death, and they were essentially punished by Merck for doing that, told that they would lose their jobs, that their job was to protect Merck and to protect Merck's profits, not to protect the public and not to sort of be honest about what their data shows. So the whole medical field just appears to be so corrupted. And that's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book argues for. And nobody's countered that argument. So the only answer to it was this, multi-leveled censorship, that comes from just this document that I described, where they talk about every level on which they're going to go after information that they disagree with. And
to that point, I mean, it's frightening to think, and when you read the book and you see what has happened to some of the world's greatest scientists that came in the path of Anthony Fauci. I was going to say your name, Tony, the other Tony.
But into my world.
Oops, a big oops. But when they got in his path and were literally had their careers just squashed in front of them, and I was really blown away and really just, I don't know, taken aback by that when you think of some of the world's greatest cancer researchers that were, I forgot his name. It's come to my, I can't think of it off the top of me, but just totally squashed because he didn't like follow the narrative of Fauci.
Even
And
sometimes those studies aren't even allowed in the
No.
first place. It goes so deep. So it's like
Yeah.
what's
Right.
funded by whom, and then if something does come out, then it's not allowed to come out. Or the report itself is just skewed. They did it the other day. They put out some report that said that here's the study, and here's what these numbers mean. No, that's absolutely not. The report is antithetical to the actual study in the first place. And people just swallow it because CNN said that's what the study says. No, that's not what the study says. Even
Right.
close to what the study
And
says.
people swallow it. And even, gosh, people in our profession swallow it because it's like, well, and our family members that are in the medical profession saying, well,
Yeah.
the people at the top have our best interests at heart. They really do, don't they? They're in it because don't
right.
they care for people?
There's absolutely no
they went
evidence
through
that
they
that's
went
true.
through med school, and they should have a heart for people because I do. Like if I was in that, they're putting themselves in that situation, thinking that they're not there to look out for big pharma. They're there to protect the people, but it's not what's happening. And it's
No.
But as Bobby Kennedy says, that's not believing in science. That's having blind faith in sort of the goodness of others or in religion.
And I think it is, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum in that. I think there's people who really, don't see it, who got into this for the right reasons and really feel like they're doing God's work. And then there's people who sort of say, well, something's not sitting right, but I finally finished and I've got this job and I want to be able to do what I've spent my whole life preparing to do, all the way up to masterminds and everything in between, and I think it's existential for some people. I think, I can't unravel everybody's psychology, but I think that it's safe to say that it's not one size fits all on any of it. What's interesting though is, the idea that science is a thing or a conclusion that someone has a corner on the market on is absurd. I mean, it's really absurd. Obviously, science is a process, and it's an ongoing process, and that's why we still have Newton's theory, and that's why there's always more information coming to light, and there's always more study, and sometimes things are irreconcilable, and we have to go back to ground zero and start over. Sometimes things are conflicting, and it's like you're seeing that over here. We're seeing this. Okay, we got to start. The answer to that is we call for more science, not we're going to censor this side so that everything fits nicely in a box. That's distinctly the opposite of science.
But look what it's done in the past, and this is what you have to, people have to look towards, right? So what grew out of Darwinism? Well, you can say that Darwinism is good, bad, right, wrong, whatever. You can debate it all you want. It's a scientific theory that a guy came up with, after he was traveling on a boat named after a dog. Okay, so that's all fine and good. But when it became established as this is the way it is, okay, the survival of the fittest, which is kind of intuitive to a certain degree. Well, in the United States, it became, the eugenics movement. We shall cleanse the undesirables. Well, of course, it starts with people that are mentally disabled or have physical disabilities. And of course, it always goes to your political rivals. That's where it goes, right? So, Margaret Sanger, we got to get rid of black people, which was basically where American eugenics went. Well, the Nazis took that and they just put it on steroids, and they made it the Germanic thing, which means it was really efficient. They had all the medical industry. They had basically a corner on the drug industry. People don't realize the medical technologies in the 20s and 30s came out of Germany, and they took this theory, right, wrong, or indifferent, and they made it into a political theory, and then it was horrible.
Which we can't ever add anything ever to that and go, oh, wow, interesting. So when you're living in a civilized society, meaning we're not dying of no clean water and toilets, okay, well, then what that by definition means is that we're sort of living in an anti-Darwin society. So let's add that now to this conversation. Nothing is in a vacuum. So yes, Darwin, great theory. Under certain circumstances, with certain variables in certain environments, now we have evolved. See what I did there? Evolved into a different place. So now maybe we add the current circumstances and the current variables in the current environment. Nope, that's not allowed. The science is settled.
Yeah, but science by consensus is not science. It's just politics.
That's
and people have
also,
or it's a very dark religion. It's a religion with no heaven, no hell, no redemption, no forgiveness. Not really the religion I want to be part of.
Sure, but if it's by consensus, meaning that you get rid of, you kill off, you deplatform anybody who has a different point of view, then you have this illusory consensus. So you have somebody like Judy Mikovits, who stood up, and so many other sort of doctors and scientists stood up, yelled from the rooftops, risked their whole livelihood. Many of them lost their whole livelihood. Many of them lost their medical licenses. These are people who we should be grateful for. And, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is one of those people, somebody who did something where there was no benefit to him at all. He's not making a penny on the book. He hasn't done any of the things that he's done, the hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits that he's brought to hold people to account for, government corruption and corporate greed, over his whole career. So, people say follow the money. And that always is a really good point, that if people are acting out of, as far as like doing the opposite of what's in their financial interest, you would give more credibility to that. You would say, why are they doing that? Somebody's not going to make up stories just to make up stories. They're going to make up stories often if they can benefit from it in some way. But so many of these people could have decided to just kind of toe the line, to take bribes essentially from people like Dr. Fauci or big pharmaceutical companies or the universities who are getting paid by big pharmaceutical companies to have a specific point of view. So, there's so many people who during this period threw every bit of self-interest to the side to try to warn the people of this country and of this world that there were things going on, that there were physical dangers, that there were dangers to their freedom and to their future. And so, what I would really like to see when Dr. Fauci leaves and hopefully gets indicted and imprisoned, that we look at the whole system, like you were saying, Sofia, that we have to dismantle this system that allows people to benefit as a government official, so that they're government officials now who get royalties on patents, on vaccines. So they're getting their in Fauci's case, his $350,000 salary, but he's also getting undisclosed royalty payments from lots of different products, and we don't have any way to know what those things are. I mean, even the New York Times, of all places, yesterday was pointing out some of these problems. So they were saying that 75% of the FDA's budget comes from companies that they're meant to regulate. So you can easily see that that's a system that's never going to work. There's just these agencies are captured, they're conflicted, and it's just the most corrupt system that you can imagine. I mean, I think people are going to look back on this period and they're going to see all of these different things. Even something like the fact that you can have big pharmaceutical companies like, people like the Sacklers, but, all of the other companies too, where they're clearly guilty of serious crimes, that people clearly died because of the actions that they took. And yet none of them go to jail, because we have this beautiful system now where that can just be a cost of doing business. So they say, well, what's the worst case? We're going to hire somebody who used to work in the Justice Department to tell us what our downside risk is. And the downside risk isn't that you go to jail. Your downside risk is what's the criminal fine going to be?
Right.
Because
Right.
corporations are people, so we can have a criminal fine.
And not so it comes down to cost benefit analysis for them, but also you have to look at how it is the system, the corrupt system, is supported by all the other systems. So for example, you might find it interesting to learn that you cannot actually go after a government agency or a government official under RICO in this country. So you can't go after Tony Fauci for racketeering. You can't go after any of these, and that is our legal system. So you have to get creative in finding ways to go after these individuals, and therefore going after the agencies that are, yes, as Tony just said, we have government agencies that are funded by the very industry they're charged with regulating. Obviously, that's corrupt. Obviously, that in no way, again, it's the closed loop I was talking about before, that in no way is set up to protect individuals. But if you try to penetrate that using the legal system, you're not allowed.
Yeah, I think Ryan Heath, when he was on, he's been on our show 3 times now, but he kind of laid that out last episode about how they were trying to go after someone who's in the school district, but we couldn't because of the way it's set up, and he's under the district of the California school systems, part of the governmental agency. He couldn't be sued. And I'm assuming that would be similar to what's going on with Tony Fauci, correct? Or
yeah, but when you think about it, Dr. Fauci says that his favorite book is The Godfather, and that his favorite line in the book is that it's just business, it's not personal. So I've said that before, but what's really fascinating there is that what he's saying is that he's in a better position than anybody in the mafia, because it's very hard to prosecute him. So you can go after a mafia figure for racketeering, but you can't go after Tony Fauci for racketeering. So what can you go after Fauci for? And if he quits at the right time, he can take the fifth on all kinds of things, and hope that he gets to sort of take all this money that he's made, and take all of his scams and corruption with him, and then just disappear. And so part of the problem that I think we all have as a country when we're going to get rid of Dr. Fauci is that we can't just claim success. We can't claim victory.
Well, and that's what the 3-letter agencies and so forth will want to do, right? They'll want to they'll want to nail to. They want their scapegoats to nail to the cross and say, okay, now it's over. We can
all go home. We got the bad guy. And that's because the human psychology, people want that so much. It's happened so much, especially in the last few years. It's like, we got the bad guy. Everyone post your black square and put the guy in jail, and he's convicted. We solved the problem. No. Actually, you just confirmed that it's going to be harder to untangle in the future.
Yes.
You actually poured concrete on your confirmation bias. But people don't understand that we need to not stop with, yes, there are bad guys. We need to, get rid of them. Absolutely. That it's criminal. But the system is also criminal. And that's why criminals thrive in a criminal system.
So, but when I look at this, I want to get to solutions. I
want to get hope, because when I think of who's entangled in this, and I would say someone in the country, can we say who, that's got the biggest purse strings, that pretty much owns all the vaccines around the world and distributes them. And I mean, you think of Gates Foundation and
now all the farmland.
Yeah, and all. Yes. I mean, and
the GMO, the heirloom varietals and all of that stuff.
Right. Like, what's the hope when?
Yeah, like what's the hope when the 2 richest guys in the entire world have Asperger's? Sorry. Now, nothing against autism or anything, but really it's an Aspergerocracy now. I mean,
in the sense that it's, you have individuals who certainly are not looking at people as humans with compassion, with empathy. You're looking at them more like a chessboard, or like this group over here, or this group over here, with a removed sense And I can't attribute that to his condition or personality disorder or whatever it is, but certainly in his actions, that's how this is being played out. And other individuals as well. He's not the only one. But I do think, I think the hope comes from us. I think the hope comes from enough people starting to say, I'm not going to comply with that system. I'm not going to play in that game. And I think, Solzhenitsyn said it in the Gulag Archipelago, not that kids read anymore, but if they did.
If they did, they probably aren't reading that. There's no vampires.
It was required reading when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe they're watching, something like Network, where people all go out, they go to their windows and they say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
But Solzhenitsyn says in a passage in the Gulag Archipelago, basically, once we all complied, we deserved everything that happened after it.
Yes.
Because what if, instead of cowering in the back rooms, every time a soldier came, he was worried that he might not make it home, that we had met them in the foyers with whatever we had, axes or fireplace pokers or whatever it is, and that we had fought back, that the entire mechanism would have ground to a halt. But we didn't.
I prefer AR-15s.
AR-15s, whatever.
Yeah,
but the point is, the reality is, if we comply and we just go, well, we'll just do this and it'll just be better and easier and we won't have to sacrifice. If we all do that, then it's hopeless. It's over. This machine is too powerful and this enemy is too powerful. Right. But if we can, Tony was just holding up Robert Malone's book. If we can be more like Robert, and we can be more like Bobby Kennedy, and we can be more like these people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for this new perspective, and it is just a new perspective, then I think there is hope, because they don't have any power so long as we don't comply.
Right. No, I want to get back to Malone just briefly. Thank you for holding up his book. I think
take a quick look just before we start at his subtitle. A little hard to see.
Oh, it is a little hard to see. Can you read it for everybody? And the better future coming.
Yes, exactly.
I love it.
I think the thing that people really, really need to understand about Robert Malone is where he came from. Okay, sure, he's an MD. He's a scientist. He ran a bunch of companies, but he came from the defense industry largely. So much of what he did was through, after 9/11. Same with Paul Alexander, right? These guys were all contracted with the defense industry. So this was bioweapons. So listen very carefully to the red-pilled bioweapons guy. I think, we love Peter McCullough. We've interviewed him a couple times. He's just a great guy. And he's super powerful from the clinical perspective because he still sees patients. Sure. So you listen to him because he's like the doctor with a conscience. But you listen to Malone because he's been kind of a machine guy to a certain degree. He's been inside the machine. He's run businesses that way. So I listen to him with a little bit of a different ear and a lot of caution. I go, boy, if Robert's saying it, then you got to be really, really, really attuned to what he's saying because he knows what's going on. So that's probably next on my nonfiction reading list because I have nothing but respect for the guy.
They made a mistake letting him talk. And I don't know. I think that there's, histories and, how people end up not involved and, it can be anything from personal vendetta to whatever, but it was a mistake to allow him. He has done single-handedly so much damage to that infrastructure, more than almost anyone I can think of, simply because whoever was, egos get in the way, and it's like, whether it's we don't like him, he's pushed out, whatever it is, they should have been a little more careful and keep your enemies closer, because he has done and will continue to do significant damage to that architecture, and that's what we need. He's the C4 at the infrastructure points, you know, and it's like, and he's just going to keep detonating. He is.
Well, and I think it's people that maybe they didn't anticipate that he would. Maybe they thought he was going to be part of the machine and stay true to their motto and be, you know, all in. And I think as time goes on, people develop more, I don't know, more courage and more heart and more, I mean, just
I think they didn't take into account that people have different levels of integrity and ethics than they do. And I think that is a sign of a personality disorder. You know, you assume that everyone is like you.
Right. I also think Scott Atlas is correct to a certain degree, which is there's just so much incompetence. Like when you do government for so long, you assume like you're in such a bubble that you become detached from real science and whatnot. And I mean, I think there's nefarious, motivations at work here. I think there's no question of that, but I also think that there's a pretty significant amount of incompetence.
I would agree with you, and I used to agree with you. I had a long conversation with Brett Weinstein about this, and his position, and he has a really good point, is that is true if the result isn't the inverse. But the reality is it's not like, oh, we tried this and it didn't work, and oh, well. If the amount of time and the steep incline in the numbers would indicate that you're actually dealing with when you adjust, even if you're incompetent, you adjust at a certain point. So when you end up with a result that's the inverse, that's when you go, that's not incompetence.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so what I was thinking of with the subtitle for Malone's book, that there's a bright future coming, is that we have all of these incredible people who are in place now. All these people who sort of sacrificed their careers to stand up and tell what they believe to be the truth, notwithstanding any of the consequences. So, like you said, you have Dr. McCullough, you have Dr. Paul Alexander, who's writing a book for us called Presidential Takedown. You have Malone, you have Dr. Pierre Corey. There's so many powerful, intelligent doctors. There's so many terrific writers like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't think that there are many people like that. I mean, I don't think that there's anybody like him specifically, but there's so many people out there who are willing to take all the risk that they've taken. And those are the future leaders. That's the bright future. That if Dr. Fauci does really go down hard, and if the American people are exposed to these other ways of viewing things, and if freedom of speech comes back to this country, we have all these future leaders in place. Because it's easy to be a Dr. Fauci if you have billions of dollars behind you and you have this apparatus that you've set up over decades and decades, where you can control the media, where you can pull all these strings. Much harder. So the government likes to tell this narrative that the real danger is in these misinformation super spreaders. But if you look at it really, I mean, what's the danger of these individual people who've been deplatformed, vilified, they've been subjected to hit pieces, their books have been taken down and banned? What is the real danger of those people versus the danger of a monolithic government with somebody who says that they represent science, and anybody who disagrees, doesn't matter if they're trying to write peer-reviewed studies, anybody who disagrees in any way, ought to be jailed, basically, ought to be just totally kicked out of the mainstream. So that's obviously such a bigger danger. So all of these really powerful people who've taken all this risk and who fought so hard over this 2.5-year period, but also for many, many years beforehand, these are the leaders. These are the people who should be running, the health departments in this country. These are the people who should be senators and congressmen and even presidents, that we need people who actually believe what they're doing and who believe in researching things and who believe in fighting even when it's so incredibly hard.
So I want to get to I'm a big picture guy. I want to get to the 20,000 foot view here.
Okay.
The brilliance of the founders was decentralized power. Okay. We don't have a parliamentary system. We don't have a true democracy. We have a republic. Okay. So we decentralize power between the House, the Senate, the executive branch, and the Supreme Court. It's brilliant. Okay. And the fact that we have individual states, even during the pandemic, still worked. I mean, the fact that there was Florida and everyone was losing their minds because everyone in Florida was going to die, and then they didn't, showed you, it showed, well, look, the pandemic isn't exactly what they say it is. So my concern is we tear down a lot of these agencies, we gut them down to the studs, and then we just rebuild them again with new people, and they work really good for 15 or 20 years, but then they're still just based on a consolidation of power, which always corrupts. I mean, the reason we have decentralized power isn't because the founders thought that there would be bad people. They recognized that they themselves were corruptible. And I think that that's
Right.
the key.
That's the
So
key.
you have to decentralize this. Like, do you have, 50 FDAs? I think that that's kind of dumb. Do you have, clearly you got to change how research is funded. That's the number one way to decentralize power is take it away from the drug companies, take it away from the universities to a large degree. I mean, this has become a circular cabal where you donate, you get a grant to the university university does research, and then, their endowment is invested back into the company that they did research for. I mean, it's just unbelievably corrupt. So it starts with the funding, but do you all have any sense as far as, how you kind of decentralize this so there's more checks and balances? Because there clearly was none in these alphabet agencies.
Sure. I mean, I would say, one, you have to get money out of politics somehow or other. You have to get all the money out. You have to get rid of the revolving door. You have to get rid of all of this influence peddling. In politics, you probably really need to have short-term limits. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in this country. We don't need all of our leaders to be very, very old people who've been in power for 50 years or 60 years. We need new voices all the time. So I think that those kinds of things really can help. But you're always going to have greed, and you're always going to have some corruption. So you just need to have a system set up where they can really be monitored and where people can't get too entrenched, and that there are other groups on the outside that watch them closely and that actually have some power.
Right. If you make it so that Mr. Strawman isn't the central figure in every argument, you have a much higher chance of, another word for people is constituents. And if you remove that from the equation, then we can start to have a real conversation. But as long as that's entangled, you're never going to get the 25 fires are going to be set, and you're never going to reach the raging inferno behind you.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. I'm thinking Tony needs to open his own chain of bookstores all across the country.
I think that's a great idea.
All of these books that we all want to get our hands on more easily. And
yes, because
Tony
there's
Lyons
something about
books.
paper.
You know what Tony told me this morning? That this week is censored book week.
No, it's banned books week.
Yes, I saw
Right.
that.
That is a great topic. So the whole concept of banned books week is that there's a very narrow kind of banned book that people in the publishing field think is terrible. But then there are all kinds of other banned books, which are, often not fully banned, but partially banned books. So they're banned from certain libraries, or banned from bookstores, or banned from advertising, or banned from the New York Times bestseller list. So those are real bans. And so the idea that we tried to send somebody to a censorship conference, and the guy went to the people there, and he was going to rent a booth and have most Skyhorse books there, but some other books too, and all really controversial books. And they basically said, "Oh, no, that's not the kind of censorship that we're concerned with," right? So what they're basically
we don't want to
saying,
talk about our banned books at a banned book.
what they're basically saying is, if we're fighting against conspiracy theories, misinformation, or basically anything that we disagree with politically, it's perfectly fine to use every shred of power that you have to ban books, to censor speech. It's only when it's something that we care about, that hits home for us, then it's an outrage.
Right.
So the absurdity of that, and of a banned book week in that's promoted by all of these big organizations and media companies that engage in censorship all the time, is just this incredible irony.
No, it's amazing, because I've always said that, if you take the Jeffersonian view, which is, if what my neighbor does not break my leg or pick my pocket, what business is it of mine? And you take that to the next level. And for me, it's, your tolerance of liberty is not tolerating something that you disagree with. It's actually tolerating something that you hate that doesn't affect you.
Right.
It's that great Aaron Sorkin quote, and I'm going to mangle it, but basically it's protecting at the top of your lungs that which someone else would shout that you hate at the top of theirs.
Yes, that's he said it better than me, but I mean that's really that's really the case. Like I can be free to disagree with same-sex marriage, and my neighbors can be free to be in a same-sex relationship. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Like it just shouldn't, we should still have, share recipes, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we don't have to agree with it's weird. It's like everything you disagree with is now like a personal offense. No, it's not.
And if you're in the minority, you're an extremist and you're dangerous.
Right.
And you're violent. So there's a new use of the word violence, that saying something that is offensive to somebody else is a violent act. So if you say, hey, at a time when the president and Fauci and many other people were saying that these vaccines would protect you from contracting or transmitting COVID, if you then said in a newsletter or on Facebook or on Instagram or in a newspaper that the vaccines didn't do that they didn't protect you from contracting or transmitting the disease, that was an act of violence. And that was clearly, by the definition, misinformation that needed to be just taken off every platform. And
even though, interestingly, now a lot of what many of ours have been saying since the beginning and were deplatformed for has now proven true. St. Fauci himself has said it. But they haven't gone back and walked that back, sure. Of course.
But Fauci's definition is a beautiful definition, because he's saying medical consensus at any moment. So he can change his mind. So he can still go back. And, there was a New York Times hit piece on Dr. Mercola, where he was saying those kinds of things. He was saying that he didn't think that the COVID-19 vaccines were safe. He didn't think that they protected you from getting COVID, and he didn't think that they protected you from contracting COVID. And the New York Times did a major hit piece on him. And that was the topic sentence, that here is this insane guy telling you that these life-saving vaccines that were going to protect you and that we were going to all just go out and celebrate, that this guy, this party pooper of a guy, was kind of coming out and telling you this thing that nobody wanted to hear. And they just attacked him. They attacked his life. They attacked his business. But there was nothing that they accused him of saying that they're not saying themselves now. And, like you said, they're not walking any of this back. They're not printing an apology to all of these doctors and scientists and writers who have been vilified, harassed, deplatformed. They're basically just sticking to their narrative.
Yeah, they're doubling down. Actually, there was a recent report of, we need to double down on going after what the CCDH is labeling the disinformation dozen, of which Bobby is top of the list. And it's amazing how and Mercola is also on that list. And it's just amazing to me how, even though, wait, you came to the conclusion that these are these dangerous individuals and you put them on this list based on information that you yourself now are saying is accurate and correct. I mean, it's just, I have nowhere to go. It's just kangaroo life right now.
It's nuts.
But it is almost worse than that when you think of the disinformation dozen. Is that was a real sort of a list that people knew about. I mean, it was quoted in every major newspaper. It was brought up time after time.
Still is.
But nobody researched it, so nobody wondered, where does that list come from? Where is the panel of experts that
Right.
sort of researched each of these people? And the answer is that it comes from this nonprofit called the Center for Countering Digital Hate, that's based in the UK, where they claim that they have
I hate them.
But CCDH
Right.
is funded by our three-letter agencies, by the way.
But they claim that they have a location in DC, but nobody's been able to find any employees there. So it's this sort of phantom organization that has a nice sounding name, but nobody knows a thing about them. Nobody's researched them. So
we do actually know a little, and I'm not allowed to say the names because we had to do a deep dive and we did come back, but there are several individuals who are named, and the funding ties go through them, and it does lead back ultimately to our three-letter agencies. So again, we're talking about the closed loop of the people.
Right. My point though is that you can go after Robert F. Kennedy's book and tell everybody in the world that it's misinformation without reading it.
Right.
And then you can hold up this mythical
phantom
nonprofit that nobody's heard of, that's funded by God knows who, and say, well, they're telling you, the Center for Countering Digital Hate is telling you that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a disseminator of misinformation that's dangerous, right? I mean, and then
who are they? Who are they? Yeah, who are these people
Yeah, I mean, when you look at
it's all the same people.
At the AP
Spoiler alert.
Right.
Yeah.
There was an AP hit piece done on Bobby Kennedy, and it had 6 investigative journalists, and they're just looking at a party that he had and things that he did 30 years ago, and it's the same basic story that's been in 10 other newspapers and magazines in that same period. So you wonder, with all of this brain power, couldn't any of them have looked up any of the information in this book?
Instead of focusing on a coordinated attack,
right,
you might actually want to find out what the real answers are. But that's not, of course, the intention. So they're never.
Well, I mean, the American people ought to think about that. Here's a book that's coming out that's incredibly well researched, that claims corruption at the highest levels of government and says that corruption is leading to people dying.
Yes.
And the response of every major newspaper is to do a hit piece on the author that has nothing to do with the book.
And not address one claim in the book.
Right. Well, it's always that way. Even, you can watch them on TV when journalists ask questions of the White House correspondence people. They just divert. They don't answer the question. Just divert.
They didn't even try to ask that question. They just did it ad hominem, hatchet pieces on the author. In some cases, didn't even mention the title of the book.
No. Yeah, we talked about that last time, right? Wasn't it just like they refused to even or was it in the book? Refused to even speak the word, refused to mention the name, like pretended like it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Which
is so fascinating to me because you know it's RFK Jr. for the love of God. I mean, you know, his family was one of the, you know, Democrat Party's icons. I mean, it was the closest thing to the royal family for, you know, 3 decades. And he has, you know, the moral courage to actually stand up for what he believes in. And he believes in freedom. You know, whether or not he disagrees with me on fiscal policy, I couldn't care less about. You know what I mean? Like, this is really cool. I mean, this is, you know, we all have our tribes, but like, you know, he's not in my political tribe, but he's in the American tribe that's fighting for freedom. And I love that. It makes me so happy. And yet he's getting killed by his own party.
Yeah,
Like,
he's getting
like
killed
that
by
can
his
tell you
own
everything
party.
you need to know.
But the problem too is that party's kind of lost the plot a little bit. So
Yeah.
they kind of dove off a cliff a little while back. And I think
I mean, they clearly have some crazy thoughts now that sort of like this country that was, you know, built on protecting minority rights and not just the rights of minorities, but minority rights in the sense of difference of opinion, difference of theory, you know, difference of worldview. So the idea that we need to protect dialogue and debate in this country is so fundamental to what this country was built on and for. And so with the left saying so often now that allowing anybody else who disagrees with them to have a platform is an endorsement of that platform. So they're letters that are written to the Times where they describe, you know, that a journalist's job isn't to give you both sides of an argument, it's to give you the truth. And so, you know, maybe a good place to start ending here is to be afraid of those kind of euphemisms like conspiracy theories, truth, misinformation. You know, the world is messy, and we want it to be messy, and we want there to be all kinds of ideas floating around, and we want to be able to discuss those and decide for ourselves what we believe, what we want to do, spend our money on, read, how we want to live, what we want to put into our bodies, all of those kinds of things. And that's what it means to live in this country.
And at the end of the day, you know, we all on this side of the fence, we might be wrong. Great. Let's have the conversation and prove us wrong. But the reality is we're not fighting to exclude the other side's narrative. We're fighting to include ours. Right. So I think that's the distinction between the two sides, where you have one side that is anything that is antithetical to their narrative is to be excluded. The other side isn't saying they even have a narrative. They're just saying, hey guys, here's some stuff we need to add to the soup, and we need to talk about this. And that's what we're fighting to include. And it's a fundamental difference between, you know, it's easy to say, well, you're fighting for blue and I'm fighting for red, and therefore we start talking about purple. That's not what's happening. It's that one side is fighting to include and the other side is fighting to exclude, and that's what's criminal here.
Absolutely. That is the perfect place to wrap this up. Man, this has just been awesome. You know, I could do this every week for sure.
We so appreciate you guys for having us, and also for doing what you do and holding the line, you know.
Well, we're just trying to do our little bit from, you know, being dopey country doctors in the middle of Oregon to, you know, I have someday I might feature it on an Instagram post, but I have a tattoo on my right arm that's a half sleeve, and I started it in 2015, and it's a plague doctor, believe it or not. And then there's a bottle of snake oil and a couple other medical instruments used for, you know, from back when we believed in the 4 humors. And on the bottom, it says, "Trust me, I'm a doctor." And it was always a reminder to be very careful what you trust, because just because it's authority and just because it's medical doesn't mean it's right. And so my whole right arm has been dedicated to that, or at least the half my right arm has been dedicated to that. And so it's we're just trying our darndest to call BS where we see it, and knowing that we're going to be wrong, because part of being BS free means that you're open to the fact that we reserve the right to be wrong.
Information. There's always going to be another variable. There's always going to be something included. So don't we want to find out as we get closer and closer to the truth? You're never going to, the truth isn't a thing either, but you're never going to get to that and then case closed, we can all go home. But we can get closer and closer, can't we? So why wouldn't you want that?
Absolutely. I mean, we've always debated each other at home as we've gone through medicine, with raising our kids, with looking at everything in our life, and we don't always agree, and that's what we
drove our kids completely insane. We'd get into medical debates, over dinner when they're like 8 and 10, and they're like, man, you guys are
but that's been the gist of this show. And to your point, it's like to present the sides, to like see try to find truth through all the data on both sides, and let people make up their minds from what's in front of them. And so we are super excited to just connect with you guys again and have you on our show, and just share and get the information out there for people to be able to make the decision for themselves. But how can people do that if they're not even allowed access to the information, which drives us all crazy, obviously. So remind us again where everyone can get the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and all the others.
I'll pull it up again. The Real Anthony Fauci. The best place to get it is on Amazon. They are censoring it in some ways, but they're censoring it. They're doing it much less than other places. So if that's an endorsement, I guess it's a kind of an endorsement.
We'll take it.
Right. And you can order it and read it, or you can listen to it on Audible like I did. Whatever your preferred method is, we highly recommend it. And thanks again, Tony and Sofia, for being on the show and sharing. It was like a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much. It was great. Great to talk to you guys.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.